So the next part of module first, that is introduction to Muslim law. Here we have to cover the four different aspects. One is development and nature of Muslim law. Another is application of Muslim law. Third one is sources of Muslim law and schools of Muslim law. So these four aspects we have to study here. So we seen in the introduction of syllabus itself, the Muslim law is up to major extent codified in nature. Codified in the sense it is not enacted by the parliament or state legislature, but it is consolidation of the religious practices among Islam. And one law is made by which this uncodified law was made applicable, that is Shariat Application Act of 1937. This act, though codified in nature, but it says that whatever Muslim personal law is there in the uncodified form, that is to be applicable to Indian Muslims. So, though word act and year is there, this law doesn't involve the structure like other codified legislation. This law does not define concepts. Concepts are taken from the uncodified law itself, but it merely says that the uncodified law is applicable to Muslim. This is said through codification. So that we will see later. But here, take in mind that four aspects we have to study: development and nature of Muslim law, application of Muslim law, sources and schools of Muslim law. So before starting with the study of Muslim law, the statement of Sayyid Amir Ali is an important, because what he says that to those not born and bred within the pale of Islam, the study of Muslim law is usually attended with great difficulties. In simple words, those who are not Muslims or those who are not familiar with the Muslim tenets, for those people, study of Muslim law is difficult to understand. So, Muslim law cannot be understandable by those persons who were not born and brought up in the Muslim culture. So that's what it evolves certain different words with which the all peoples are not familiar. So that's what Sayyid Amir Ali had pointed out, the difficulty in studying Muslim law. So with this statement or with this fact in mind, we will move towards the development of Muslim law. We will not come directly to India, but prior to that, we will see how Muslim law is developed, and then we will see how it comes to India and how it is flourished in India. So the development is divided into three periods. The first period in the development of Muslim law is one between 1 AH to 10 AH. Now AH is a calendar of Muslim, like what we call Isvisan, etc. So age is after Hejira. So Hejira is a journey of the Prophet Muhammad and his followers from Makkah to Medina. And this period is called as Hejira, and on this basis the Muslim calendar is prepared. So when the journey started, the period is counted from first. So the Makkah is a birthplace of the Muhammad, and Medina where he spent his last 10 years till his death. So this journey is to be considered as Hijra, and the first period in the development of Muslim law is ranges from 1 AH to 10 AH. So the Prophet had conquered Makkah, and in the last few years of his life he took upon himself the task of legislations. So he tried to consolidate the law during the last period of his life. So most of the verses of Quran revealed during this period deals with the legal aspect. So law was revealed during the last time of the Muhammad. So the precepts of the Prophet acquired a binding force because Muslim believes that the action and saying of the Prophet were inspired or commanded by God. So in other words, the God or Allah Himself revealed the verses of Quran to the Muhammad. So there were direct, what we see in Hindu law also, certain rishis were listen the utterances of God. Same thing is here. The Muhammad, the founder of Islam, listen the verses of Quran from the God, and thereby Quran is developed. So within first period, the legal aspects of Quran were developed because Quran not only deal with the law, but each and every aspect of human life has been dealt with by the Quran. But we are concerned with the legal aspects of the Quran only. So first period deals with the revelation of the Quran by Allah to the Muhammad. Now second period is the period of 30 years. It ranges from 10 age to 40 age. Again, age means after Hijrah. When the rightly guided Khalifas, thereafter the Khalifas were appointed on the basis of rightly guided. Rightly guided means self-conscious, virtuous people, those who are free from hatred. So those rightly, Khalifa is a king of Muslim state. So they were appointed. They were Abu Bakr, Umar, Usman, and Ali. During this period, there was a close adherence to the ancient practice under the guise of adherence to the Sunnah, the precept of the Prophet. Thereafter, in the second period, the traditions and cultures observed or the behavior observed by the Muhammad was collected. And this behavior or custom and tradition of the Prophet Muhammad were called as a Sunnah. So, these sunnahs were consolidated during the second period and the Quran was edited. So during this period, the collection and editing of the Quran was took place. And this authorized text of the Quran, which remains without change or corruption to this day, was first published during the regime of Usman, the third Caliph. So the final Quran was published during the regime of Usman, who is the third Khalifa after Muhammad. Then we will move towards the third period. This period is ranges from 30 AH to 3rd century. Now the century arises here after Hijrah. Now this period was also important because it was during this period that the work of collection of the traditions of the Prophet took place. So Quran is a primary source and traditions of the Muhammad. They were collected, consolidated and published. There were several books in Muslim law regarding traditions of the Muhammad. Those traditions were also followed as a Muslim law if the Quran is silent, like we follows Puranas, etc. Or in Hindu law, Puranas, commentaries. Similarly, in Muslim law, the traditions of Muhammad were collected. They were called as hadith that we will see in sources. So this was took place during the third period. And during this period, the four school of Sunni law arose. So the schools were named on the basis of their founders. So while collecting the traditions of the Muhammad, the school of Sunni law emerged and these schools were named that we will see in the schools. And the last period, that is fourth period, in the development of Islamic law extends from the 3rd century after Hijrah to the present day. So till present, the fourth period is called, or the fourth period in the development of Muslim law ranges from 3rd century to present day. So after the four recognized schools had been founded, later scholars applied themselves to the method laid down by the founders and developed each system in a particular manner. So during the last period, the doctrine of Taqlid, following by imitations or Istihad. Now memorize these words. Istihad is the power of independent interpretation of law. Like Smritis were interpreted in Hindu law, here also the custom traditions and Quran was interpreted by Maulavis, Muftis that we will see, and these interpretations were called as Istihad or Taqlid, and they were followed as a law. So there were two broad schools among Hindu law, Sunni and Shia. So as per Shia school is concerned, they deny and dispute the principle of election by the people. The two groups, Sunni and Shia, were divided because of the who shall be the head after the Muhammad. This dispute was raised because the one group says that there should be an election, and by election the leader should be elected, and other group says that no, the Muhammad himself appointed his successor, therefore no election should took place, and this results into two groups called as Shia and Sunnis. So Sunnis from belongs to those groups who deny and dispute the principle of election by people in the matter of Khalifa and hold that the Prophet had appointed Ali as his successor. So Shia denied elections and stated that the Ali was already appointed as a Khalifa by the Muhammad. That's what there should be no election. And other, that is Sunni, they stated that there should be an election of the next Khalifa. Thereby, these two schools emerged. Now the Shia are divided into large number of schools, the most important of which are Ismaili and Itna Ashari that we will see in the schools. So in India, the Ismailis consist of two main groups, that is the Khojas and Bohras. So we are concerned with the Indian Muslims only because unlike Hindu law, Muslim law cannot travel beyond and extraterritorial operations because other nations have their own law for the Muslim community, like Kuwait, wherein the Sharia law is not followed, but they are having their own civil law. So, this law, Shariat Application Act, is applicable only to Indian Muslims. So, in India, the Ismailis school is observed, and there were two groups among Ismailis, that is Khojas and Bohras. So the Khojas are the followers of Aga Khan and Bohras are mainly the followers of Saidna or Dai. So the majority of Shia belongs to Itna Ashari school, whereas there were two schools. So the word Shia is in India applied in general to the Itna Ashari school of Shias. What Itna Ashari and Ismaili schools that we will see in the schools in Shia law. Now one concept in Shia law is prevailing, that is concept of Imam. According to Sunni doctrine or in Muslim law, sorry, not Shia particularly, but in Muslim law, the concept of Imam is prevailing. The Imam here, according to Sunni doctrine, the leader of the Muslims at any given moment is a Khalifa, who is the leader, and he is no more a temporal ruler than a religious chief. So, in religious matter, he has nearly to follow the Sharia. So, the concept of the Imam, according to Shia, is totally different. So, this is the fundamental difference between the Shia and the Sunni theology. According to Shia, Imam is the final interpreter of the laws. Whatever said by the Imam on legal question is considered as final among Shias. And he is the leader not by election but by divine right, because he is the messenger of God. So, whatever said by him is considered as said by God. So, as he is the successor of Prophet, as we already discussed, descendant of Ali. Therefore, there is a weightage to the word of Imam in Shia law. The Shias told that no hadith is valid. Hadith is the customs observed by the Muhammad. So, according to Shia, these hadiths are not valid unless it is related by an Imam descended from the Prophet. So, hadith or traditions of the Muhammad shall not be accepted as a law unless Imam interprets it and comes to a particular conclusion. So, they accept the authority of the Quran but say that only the Imam can say what the correct interpretation of the law is and no other. So, in interpreting the Quran, the authority of Imam is accepted in Shia. Therefore, according to the Shia, the Imam is a lawgiver himself. But as he is a hidden, the Mujtahid, that is corresponding to the Sunni Qazis, are his agent and they interpret the law. So, in Sunni law, they were Qazis, perform the same rule. So, Ijtihad is the power of interpretation as discussed earlier. Therefore, Imam is having a different significance under Muslim law. Therefore, under Shia law, the law consists of rules of conduct based on interpretation of Quran given by the Imams. Now we will comes to the development of Muslim law in India. Are you getting what I am saying is? कळतंय ना काय चाललंय ते? प्रेझेंटेशन समोर ठेवा म्हणजे जास्त अडचण येणार नाही. सुरुवातीलाच सांगितलं की इकडे थोडा पाठांतराचा भाग राहील. 4 पिरियड तुम्हाला लक्षात ठेवायचे फक्त. आणि कन्सेप्ट ऑफ इमाम ती शिया लॉ सुन्नी लॉ मध्ये कशी वेगळी आणि शिया लॉ सुन्नी लॉ काय इमर्ज झाले दोन एवढंच. असंही आता हा पूर्ण थेअरीचा पार्ट आहे. प्रॅक्टिकली इंडियामध्ये पण मुस्लिम लॉ साठी शरीयत ऍप्लिकेशन ऍक्ट आहे आणि पुढच्या कन्सेप्ट जास्त महत्वाचे आहे. जसं हिंदू लॉ मध्ये काही रिलिजियस गोष्टी आपण पाहिल्या, श्रुती स्मृती पुराणास, त्याचा आज जास्त रिलेव्हन्स नाहीये. सेम या हिस्टॉरिकल डेव्हलपमेंटचा प्रॅक्टिकल रिलेव्हन्स आज कमी आहे दोन्हीकडे पण, हिंदू लॉ मध्ये पण मुस्लिम लॉ मध्ये पण. पण फॉर सेक ऑफ थिअरी जो तुम्हाला पहिला प्रश्न आला तर डेव्हलपमेंट ऑफ मुस्लिम लॉ त्यावेळी या गोष्टी येतील. सो वी विल कम टू इंडिया that how Muslim law is made applicable into India. So of course when Mughals invaded or encroached into India, they were Hanafis. So Mughal emperors being Hanafi, they administered Hanafi. Hanafi is one of the school that we will see, and Mughals belongs to that school. So the Hanafi law was administered in India till the establishment of the British rule, because the British rule ends into the Mughal empire. But prior to that, there was Mughal empire in India, and these Mughals belongs to Hanafi law. They administered Hanafi law in India. And after British rule, that we will see what happened with the Muslim law. So the British applied Muslim law as a branch of personal law to those who belongs to the Muslim religion in accordance with the principle of their own school or sub-schools. So Britishers when came, they did not disturb the personal law. They neither disturbed Hindu law, they neither disturb Muslim law. That's what they ruled for 200 years. So they applied Muslim personal law for Muslims and Hindu law for Hindu, personal law for Hindus, as already seen. So in all suits regarding inheritance, marriage, caste, religious institutions, the law laid down in the Quran, in accordance with the opinion of Maulavis, were adhered by the Britishers while dealing with the cases among Muslims. So with the changing social conditions, the need for a change in some of these laws become apparent. But subsequently, the change was become apparent in the Muslim law. Therefore, certain portions of the law was abolished, such as slavery, forfeiture of right, or apostasy. Apostasy means forfeiture of rights after conversion. Apostasy means conversion from one religion to another religion as per Muslim law. And this apostasy was considered as a bar earlier. So apostate means converter. If somebody convert from Muslim religion to another religion, all his right will be forfeited. So this concept was abolished by the Britishers and Freedom of Religion Act was enacted. This was removed. But still there were certain bar that we will see. So similarly, certain portions of the customary law were altered to make the original rules of Islamic law applicable. Now, Britishers started codification in Muslim law. The first, they enacted the Waqf Act of 1913. Waqf is a religious charitable institutions among Muslim law, like we have a mutt in Hindu law. There were Waqf to impart charity among Muslims. So to regulate the Waqf WAKF Act was enacted in the year 1930. And today, the law of marriage, divorce, dower, legitimacy, guardianship, work, wills, gift, inheritance among Muslims is uniform all over India. And this was made sorry, by the Shariat Act of 1937. Now, this act abrogated custom and restored to Muslims their own personal law in almost all cases. So, during the Britishers itself, the Shariat Act of 1937 was accepted and made applicable. Therefore, Muslim law as applied in India is the Shariat Act as modified by the principles of English common law and equity. Now we will see the application of Muslim law. So, like Hindu law, Muslim law is a personal law. Unlike territorial laws, it does not apply to all persons in a given state. It applies only to those persons who answer the following description. That is, he is a Muslim, whether they are so by birth or by conversion. So here also, like Hindus, Muslim can be a Muslim by birth and Muslim by conversion. By birth, of course, who is born as a Muslim and who follow Muslim traditions. So Muslim is to be a Muslim is to profess Islam. That is, to acknowledge that there is a God or only one God. There is a God but God. It means there is only one God and Muhammad is his prophet. The messenger of God is only one. That is the Muhammad Paigambal. That's what the saying in Muslim law is La ilahi illallah Muhammad or Rasul Allah. It means that there is only one God and Muhammad is his prophet. Those who are believers of this doctrine, they were considered as Muslim for application of Muslim personal law in India. So, profession of the faith of Islam, that is the unity, belief in the unity of the God and the mission of Muhammad as a prophet or messenger of God are necessary and sufficient for establishing that a person is a Muslim by birth or even by conversion. That's what Muslim community believe only one God, that is Muslim, and they oppose the other things many times. This is not the part of Muslim, otherwise this will amount to prayer, etc. So only one prayer or only one God in Muslim law. Because offering for two or more God, if there, then it will go against to the Muslim faith. So it is not necessary that he should observe any particular rites or ceremonies for conversion. Ceremonies are not required or particular rituals need not be performed to become a Muslim by conversion. A person who is born a Muslim remains a Muslim until he renounces the religion, or the mere adoption of some Hindu form of worship does not amount to the renunciation of religion. If any Muslim observes certain Hindu ritual, that doesn't mean that he had converted to Hinduism. So there must be a declaration to that effect. So then, by birth, an illegitimate son of a Hindu by a Muslim woman who is brought up as a Hindu may be regarded as a Hindu, though his mother is a Muslim. So, Muslim law applies to Muslim by birth, Muslim by religion, that is, who convert to Islam. So, we seen it is a branch of personal law and applicable to all personal aspects of the Muslim. Take in mind again, and even in Hindu law also, it applies to all personal aspect, that is marriage, divorce, dower, will, gift, succession, paternity, guardianship, divorce, etc. But in other matters, the secular legislations were observed, that is tort. If there were two Muslim and one Muslim causes loss to another Muslim by nuisance, by negligence, a Muslim doctor, while performing operation on a Muslim patient, negligently causes death or loss to Muslim patient, the case will not be governed by Shariat Application Act. The case will be governed by the law of tort, law of crime, Indian Contract Act, Consumer Protection Act, etc. So secular aspects were not covered. Only personal aspects were covered by Shariat Application Act. So we'll stop here.